I stood before my drafting table, the crisp lines of the Helix Tower blueprints illuminated by the morning light filtering through the glass walls of the penthouse office. Today was my 18th birthday, but there were no balloons, no cake, no warm wishes. Just the hum of the server and the scratching of Joseph's pen as he signed documents at his mahogany desk. He walked over, not looking at me but at the blueprints. My blueprints. With a sneer that twisted his features into something unrecognizable, he tossed a single crisp $100 bill onto the table. It landed softly, covering the intricate structural calculations I had agonized over for weeks. "Happy birthday, Grace," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Take it. I'm done feeding a stray cat. Pack your things. You're fired." He leaned in close, the scent of expensive cologne cloying in the air. "You're a talentless burden just like your mother. I'm trimming the fat." He turned his back on me, dismissing me like I was nothing more than a clerical error he had finally corrected. But as I looked at that bill sitting on top of my designs, the very designs he intended to steal to save his failing career, something cold and hard settled in my chest. Before we see how Grace tears his empire down, drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it in your corner of the world? I love seeing our community light up the map. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The office smelled of expensive espresso and betrayal, a scent I had grown accustomed to over the years. I picked up the $100 bill not out of greed but as evidence. It felt heavy in my hand, a tangible representation of his arrogance. I moved methodically, packing my singular belongings. My drafting pencils worn down to nubs from endless nights of work, and my hard drive, the digital vault of my intellectual property. Joseph watched me from his desk, a smug smile playing on his lips, assuming my silence was submission. He thought he had crushed me, but he was wrong. As I placed the items into my bag, my mind was already racing, cataloging the metadata on my private server. Every file, every timestamp, every revision history. It was all there, irrefutable proof that the Helix Tower was mine. He could steal the paper, but he couldn't steal the digital footprint. I zipped up my bag, the sound loud in the quiet office. I walked to the door, my steps steady on the polished floor. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cold Chicago wind, the city rising around me like a fortress of glass and steel. I wasn't a victim leaving the scene of a crime. I was a strategist leaving the battlefield to regroup. The transition to my new reality was swift. My apartment was small and dim, a stark contrast to the penthouse office, but it was mine. I looked at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The girl staring back at me looked tired, but her eyes were clear. For years I had lived in a prison of gratitude, a structure Joseph had built brick by gaslighting brick. He had convinced me that my talent was nothing without his guidance, that my vision was flawed without his correction. "You have no eye for structure," he would say, while simultaneously demanding I fix his sketches until 3 in the morning. It wasn't just about money or a job. It was psychological warfare. He had created a reality where I was dependent on him for my very sense of self-worth. I had believed him. I had believed that I was lucky to be there, lucky to be learning from him, even as he took credit for every line I drew. It was a learned helplessness, a conditioning so deep it felt like instinct. But as I stood there in the silence of my own space, the fog began to lift. I realized that the chains binding me to him weren't made of iron. They were made of lies. I wasn't weak. I was strong enough to survive him, and now I was strong enough to destroy him. Weeks turned into a blur of news cycles and industry gossip. Joseph was everywhere. He had won the bid for the massive Helix Tower project, and the architectural world was fawning over him. He gave interviews, his face plastered on magazine covers, claiming the vision had come to him in a dream. A dream. It was my reality he was stealing. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "See? Real architects win. You were just a tracer. Don't bother using me as a reference." His arrogance was boundless. He truly believed I was too poor, too young, and too broken to fight back. He thought he had erased me. But every time I saw his face on a screen, every time I read his quotes about innovation and vision, the fire in my belly grew hotter. He wasn't just a thief. He was a parasite, feeding off my talent to sustain his crumbling ego. And like any parasite, he needed a host. Without me, he was nothing. I stopped grieving the father figure I never really had. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. I went to the public library, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. I accessed the cloud server I had secretly maintained, the one Joseph didn't know existed. I began to compile a digital portfolio, timestamped sketches, early drafts, notes on structural integrity. And then the piece de resistance, the specific structural flaw I had intentionally left in the decoy files on Joseph's computer. A flaw so subtle only the original architect would know how to fix it. I wasn't looking for a lawyer. Lawyers were slow, expensive, and could be bought. I was looking for something more powerful. I was looking for the client. The entity commissioning the Helix Tower. The one with the money and the power to end Joseph's charade with a single phone call. I scoured public records, construction permits, and industry whispers. Finally, I found a name. Edward. An infrastructure mogul known for being elusive. A ghost in the machine of Chicago's development scene. I drafted a single encrypted email to his private firm. The subject line was simple, precise, and terrifying to anyone who understood architecture. The load-bearing calculation on the 40th floor is wrong. Here is the correction. I attached the proof of my authorship, the digital breadcrumbs that led straight back to me. I hit send and waited. The response was immediate, flashing across my screen like a lightning bolt. Come to my office. Now. I walked into Edward's office, the space imposing and sleek, a testament to his power. He sat behind a desk that looked more like a command center than furniture. He didn't offer me a seat. He just held up my drawings, his eyes scanning them with an intensity that made me want to flinch. But I didn't. I stood my ground. He began to drill me on architectural theory, throwing complex questions at me about load distribution, wind shear, and material stress. I answered every single one. Flawlessly. I didn't just know the answers, I felt them. Architecture wasn't just math to me, it was a language and I was fluent. Edward finally set the papers down. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. I didn't take this meeting because of the structural flaw, he said, his voice low. I took it because the style of this drawing, it reminded me of someone. Someone from my past. He opened a drawer and pulled out a photo. It was old, the edges worn. A woman stood in front of a building, smiling. My mother. My breath hitched. Your mother, Edward said. She had the same eye. The same way of seeing the world. He wasn't just the client. He was my biological father. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years I had been told my father was dead, a man who didn't want me. Edward explained the truth. He had been told the baby was lost, that my mother had moved on. He had hired Joseph's firm because he wanted to support the man who raised me, believing Joseph was a decent man stepping up. He had been paying Joseph consulting fees for years. Money meant for my education, for my future. Money I never saw. It wasn't just plagiarism, it was fraud. It was embezzlement. It was a betrayal so profound it made my knees weak. Edward wanted to sue immediately. He wanted to drag Joseph into court and destroy him. But I shook my head. No, I said. Not yet. He wants the spotlight. Let's give it to him. But let's make sure it burns him. We plotted the ambush for the upcoming Skyline Design Awards Gala, the night Joseph was set to receive the contract publicly. It wouldn't be a reunion. It would be an execution. The Skyline Design Awards Gala was a spectacle of glass, light, and ego. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton buzzed with the hum of 1,000 conversations, the clink of crystal and the rustle of silk. It was the kind of room Joseph lived for, the kind of room he believed he owned. I watched him from the shadows near the entrance, my heart beating a steady war drum rhythm against my ribs. He stood near the center of the room, holding a champagne flute like a scepter, preening as colleagues congratulated him on the Helix Tower contract. He looked every inch the visionary architect he pretended to be. Tuxedo perfectly tailored, smile practiced, confidence radiating off him like heat. But I knew the truth. It wasn't confidence, it was a costume. I stepped into the light. Edward had funded my attire for the evening. A sharp architectural black jumpsuit that commanded attention without begging for it. I walked toward Joseph, my steps silent on the plush carpet. He spotted me when I was 10 feet away. His smile faltered, then vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He excused himself from his admirers and intercepted me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was meant to hurt. I told you to stay away, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. What are you doing here? You look cheap. I look like the architect of the building you're about to accept an award for, I replied, my voice calm. I pulled my arm free. And you look nervous, Joseph. He fumbled in his pocket, his movements jerky. He pulled out a money clip and peeled off several bills, hundreds this time. Take it, he said, thrusting the cash at me. Take it and get out. Make a scene and I will ruin you. I made you, Grace. I can unmake you. I looked at the money in his hand. It was pathetic. It was his only move, his only language. Keep it, I said, stepping around him. You're going to need it for legal fees. I left him standing there, mouth agape, and took my seat at the front table next to Edward. The lights dimmed. The room hushed. Joseph scrambled to his seat across the aisle, shooting daggers at me, sweating through his expensive suit. Edward took the stage. He didn't need a microphone to command the room. His presence was enough. Architecture is the art of truth, he began, his voice resonating through the hall. It reveals the structure of our world. But sometimes structures are built on lies. Innovation is rare. Theft is common. Joseph stiffened. He buttoned his jacket, preparing to stand, assuming this was the preamble to his coronation. Tonight, we honor the design for the Helix Tower, Edward continued. A design so unique, so mathematically precise, it could only come from one mind. He clicked a remote. The massive screen behind him lit up. It wasn't a render of the building. It was a blueprint. My blueprint. The original scan from my sketchbook, dated 3 years ago. And then an overlay appeared. The metadata from my cloud server highlighting the creation date, the revision history, the author, Grace_Arch_01. The winner of the contract, Edward said, his eyes locking onto Joseph, is the architect who actually drew this. The architect whose college fund was stolen to prop up a failing firm. Please welcome my daughter and the lead architect of the Helix project, Grace. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the ballroom. Joseph froze, half standing, caught in a posture of awkward anticipation that instantly curdled into humiliation. I stood up. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at Joseph. And then he snapped. It wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. Joseph rushed the stage, his face purple, veins bulging in his neck. She's incompetent, he screamed, his voice cracking. She's a charity case. I taught her everything she knows. I own her. He waved his arms, the expensive watch on his wrist flashing under the stage lights. A symbol of wealth he hadn't earned. I am the visionary here. Me. Look at my suit. Look at who I am. Security guards intercepted him before he could reach Edward, holding him back as he thrashed and spat. The crowd watched in horrified fascination. It was a masterclass in the psychology of the imposter. You see, Joseph's rage wasn't strength. It was the panic of a man whose identity was entirely purchased. He believed that if he had the right things, the office, the awards, the money, he was somebody. But deep down he knew the truth. He was a hollow shell. His status was a coat of paint over a crumbling foundation. When you strip away the stolen credit and the embezzled funds, there is no Joseph the architect. There is only a frightened, mediocre man terrified of being seen. His meltdown wasn't just a tantrum. It was the illusion of power shattering against the hard surface of reality. He thought his wallet gave him authority. But tonight, in front of the entire city, he learned that you can rent a lifestyle but you cannot buy a legacy. They dragged him out, still screaming about his importance. I walked up the stairs to the podium. Edward stepped aside, beaming with a pride that felt like the sun. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the industry titans who had ignored me for years. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. The blueprints behind me spoke for themselves. The aftermath was swift and absolute. The legal system does not look kindly on trustees who embezzle from minors, especially when the evidence is presented by a billionaire with a grudge. Joseph was charged with fraud and grand larceny. His firm was dissolved within the week, his partners fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. His reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was incinerated. We saw him in the news occasionally, a haggard figure entering the courthouse, alone. I imagined him sitting in a small cell or a cheap motel room, perhaps looking at that same $100 bill he tried to bribe me with, realizing it was the only thing he had left. I didn't visit him. I didn't need closure from him. I had built my own closure. 6 months later, I stood in my new office. It wasn't a glass penthouse in the Gold Coast. It was a converted loft in the River North District, brick and timber, filled with light and the energy of creation. I wasn't working for Edward. We were partners. My name was on the door right next to his. I was designing the Helix Tower, overseeing construction, making decisions that reshaped the skyline I loved. There was a knock on my door frame. It was Aaron, my new intern. He was young, nervous, clutching a sketchbook like a shield. He reminded me so much of myself at 16. I finished the drafts you asked for, he stammered. But they're probably not good enough. I walked over to him. I didn't take the drawings and dismiss him. I sat down next to him. Let's look at them together, I said. Your eye for structure is good. You just need to trust your line. I saw his shoulders relax, a weight lifting off him. I was breaking the cycle. I was building a firm where talent was nurtured, not stolen. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The steel and glass rose up to meet the sky, a testament to human will. I belonged here. I wasn't a tracer. I wasn't a burden. I was an architect. If you are watching this and you feel like you are living in the shadows of someone else's ego, if you are doing the work while someone else takes the bow, listen to me. You are not their prop. You are not their background character. They want you to believe that you are nothing without them because they know deep down they are nothing without you. Break the glass. Take your blueprints. Walk out the door. It will be cold and it will be scary, but I promise you the air is cleaner on the other side. You are the architect of your own life. Do not let anyone else hold the pen.